You're watching TIME 100 Talks. I'm Haley Edwards, senior editor at Time, and I'm joined by U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth. Let's just jump right into the news. Your Republican colleagues in the Senate released their COVID relief plan on Monday night. Is there anything in there that surprised you?
Unfortunately not. They've really gutted any attempts at providing relief to working Americans across this country. It's really a bill that is going to give a helping hand to large corporations, and it really goes after all of the programs that are in it for working families and folks who need a helping hand. It includes a major cut to the unemployment insurance money. It includes money for corporations, protections for corporations with liability protections, but nothing in terms of compensation for frontline workers in terms of OSHA protections, for example. And it even, provides money for mega agriculture, but no money for the SNAP program. So I unfortunately am not surprised. It's pretty depressing though to see that in the middle of a global pandemic, when so many people are hurting, that this is what they come up with.
You were tweeting about the cuts to Medicaid home and community services, which will have obviously a huge impact on people with disabilities. Can you just say a word on that?
Of course. So there's no money in the Republican proposal for, in addition to Medicaid home services, also nursing homes, which is where the pandemic is spreading. But for people with disabilities, we have fought for a very long time for the right to live our lives as independently, as productively as we want to live. And that means getting people out of institutions where it is appropriate. So most folks want to live within the community. That's why we got the ADA passed. People should not be housed and warehoused in large institutions who can live perfectly normal lives. But they need a little help, and that's where the Medicaid home health services comes in. And all of that is just left by the wayside in this bill. There's no money in it for that. And that will mean that people with disabilities, in order to live just their regular lives, will be looking at having to be re-institutionalized, which is going completely against decades of work that has been done to help people with disabilities really have their civil rights and live fully productive lives that they want to live.
So pivoting slightly to something that is dear to many people's hearts and yours as well, as the mother of two kids under 6, school reopenings. The Republicans' bill does include some funding for schools, which is something that you've said is necessary. Does it go far enough? And what can be done on the federal level to get kids back in school as soon as possible?
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank all the educators out there, because as someone who's been trying to homeschool a 5-year-old, let me just tell you, I am not trained to do this. And like most moms, I desperately want my daughter to be able to go back and have a regular classroom experience and get the training, the teaching that she gets from a trained educator. That said, I also don't want her to contract COVID-19 and be sick. Or bring that illness home into the household, where I have a 79-year-old mom who lives with me and a 2.5-year-old baby as well. So the bill that the Republicans are proposing has some money for schools, not enough money, but that money is tied to you must reopen schools and bring students back. But there's no guidelines from this administration on how to do that safely. The Department of Education has not put out any guidelines to schools on how they should open. They have not provided any additional dollars for PPP, additional equipment. They have not provided any additional dollars for keeping our schools clean, or even for testing of teachers and all of the workers in the school, and also of students. So basically it's saying, here's a global pandemic. If you want a little bit of money, you have to reopen schools and put all of your teachers and all of the students out there with no protection. I'm not comfortable sending my daughter into a pandemic unprotected, and I don't think most other moms would be either. So this proposal from the Republicans is woefully inadequate.
So just to return to a little aside there, I think some people might be surprised that a sitting senator is actually homeschooling her own daughter right now. How is that going?
Well, 4 months ago, almost 5 months ago, when this started, I had wonderful plans. I set aside every morning, so we would do 4 hours of instruction together. And I was going to do baking with her, to do math. So she would have to measure and count. And then I have I converted my entire dining room, and over here was an art corner with like artist supplies, and over here was gonna be a math corner, and we're gonna do math here, and we're gonna do, and then I got posters I put all over the walls with the alphabet. We're gonna do basic phonics. At this point, 5 months later, it's like, here, kiddo, 5 worksheets, you get those done, you're done. It's so difficult. It's so difficult, and it is humbling. You know, I have a PhD, and I'm a US Senator, and I can fly helicopters, but I am not trained or equipped to teach a single 5-year-old. And so I have nothing but admiration for educators who do this voluntarily on a regular basis. God bless our teachers out there, and they need all the support that they can get to do the very difficult job that they're doing. And I see where I'm failing my daughter, and you know, the mom guilt kicks in. The mom guilt kicks in because I see like, oh my gosh, she's not reading as well as she was when she was in the classroom and she was on track. And now, you know, she doesn't know what the difference between the p sound and the b sound, between a P and a B. And it's my fault. I'm the one that's letting her down, and she's going to be behind the other kids when school comes back to normal. You know, all that mom guilt piles on top of everything. So it's hard for working families out there.
Maybe we can relate to that a little better than you being a decorated combat veteran, which many of us have less experience with. But in that role as a combat veteran, you've taken a particular interest in the news from earlier this summer about Russia paying bounties for U.S. troops killed in Afghanistan. How do you make sense of President Trump's sort of avoidance of that issue, apparent refusal to address Russia on it?
Well, unfortunately, it reinforces the fact that he is a failed commander-in-chief. He's the commander-in-chief of our military, and he's failed in his duties as commander-in-chief time and again. He's politicized the military, and now we find out that he was being briefed that the Russians had, an adversary had placed bounties on American troops' heads in Afghanistan, and either didn't pay attention to his briefing and doesn't remember, which in itself is a dereliction of duty, or sort of thought it wasn't important to do anything about it. But regardless, he's done nothing about it. And it's been weeks and months since the story broke that this has happened, and he still has done nothing about it. He's not talked about it with Vladimir Putin. He's not come to the Senate and asked for help with additional sanctions against the Russians. He's done nothing about it but deny, and claims that he did not know that this was happening. He hasn't even called a Gold Star family. You know, I was talking to a Gold Star mom who lost her son a year ago at the end of this month in Afghanistan, and she was crying on the phone saying, I want to know if he was killed for a bounty. When I asked the Department of the Army if they've conducted any investigations into whether any of the troops' deaths and injuries in Afghanistan in the past year have been connected to Russian bounties, the answer was no. They haven't even bothered to begin an investigation. This is dereliction of duty on the part of the commander-in-chief. Our troops deserve to know that their leadership stands beside them and have their back when we send them into harm's way. And unfortunately, that's not the message that President Trump is sending right now.
We are, of course, living in a moment of extraordinary social upheaval. You have obviously been in the center of that debate lately, and you've staked out a unique position. You say you personally oppose pulling down Washington statue, say, but you support people's right to demand its removal. Can you talk about how that works in this sort of highly politicized world? How do we walk that line? How do we have the national debate?
Well, I spent 23 years in the Army defending people's First Amendment rights. I defended the Constitution. My oath of office that I've been taking since in my early 20s was to defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so I fully am today, to this day, willing to die to protect a person's right to peacefully protest and to peacefully state their opinions, especially to their leaders in government and especially to their public servants such as myself. And so I think it's very consistent with where I've been and the founding of our nation. After all, it was a bunch of protesters who threw tea into Boston Harbor as a form of protest against unjust treatment by a monarch. And so I have always supported people's rights to freedom of speech. I think that we should remove all Confederate statues and rename Confederate bases, our bases and a name for Confederates, because they are traitors to the Union. These are people who took up arms against our nation. As for our founding fathers, you know, look, of course I don't want to pull down George Washington's statue, but I do defend everybody's rights to speak their mind. But let's be clear what's happening here. President Trump and his allies are trying to divert Americans' attentions away from their failures. The fact that we are now approaching 150,000 dead Americans from this pandemic, which he said would magically disappear by April. His words would magically disappear. The fact that he's done nothing about the bounties on troops' heads in Afghanistan, the fact that he's done nothing but hurt our agricultural sector, for example, with his trade wars, the fact that he's done nothing to address issues of racism in our criminal justice system. This is all a diversion on his part away from all of his failures as president. And we cannot let him succeed at that, because this country is hurting right now. Americans are hurting. Families don't know how they're going to pay their mortgage, how they're going to pay their rent. Moms and dads don't know how they're going to feed their kids if there's no school lunch available. People are hurting and they need a leader.
So you think this debate over Confederate monuments is President Trump and his allies deliberately stoking a culture war?
Very much so. Very much so. This president, time and again, when his failings become apparent, what he does is he blows his racism dog whistle, except that it's no longer a dog whistle, and he stokes up partisan divides in this country at a time when we should be coming together as a nation. We need someone that's going to pull us together as a nation and bound our wounds, which is what I believe we should be doing instead of trying to divide us.
On that, I mean, your politics and your are interesting. I mean, you're often described as center left or center moderate, and there are such a thing as a Trump Duckworth voter. Many of the
Yes.
people who voted for you also voted for President Trump. You've demonstrated that you have an appeal in the rural Midwest, which is, I think, one of the reasons why you are on a short list of people Joe Biden is considering for vice president. How do you reconcile your criticism of Donald Trump, your sort of very outspoken criticism of his leadership and his dereliction of duties, as you put it, and the fact that many of your supporters support him? How do you walk that line?
Well, it's not a line to walk. It's talking to people where they live and addressing the issues that they're facing. The people who vote for me know that I am going to go up to bat for them every single day to help them be able to do things like pay their mortgage and get their kids through college and get to retirement and have health care. That's really what most Americans are struggling with right now. And yes, there are Trump Duckworth voters in Illinois. It's about 6%. But the important part about that is that I listen, that they let me through the door and I listen to them. When I talk to a coal miner, he says to me, I feel like this country has just thrown me aside. After we grew in the 60s and 70s based on the energy I provided by digging a hole in the ground to provide the coal, you are now just leaving me behind. All I want to do is make it to retirement and make sure my kid gets through college and has a future. So it's by listening to one another and finding common ground that we can move forward. And so there's no line for me to walk. It's about being human and approaching every conversation I have, assuming that the person I'm talking to loves this country as much as I love this country. And if you do that and you love this America as much as I do, we can compromise and we can move forward together. But really it's about acknowledging and recognizing the human condition and understanding that we all have pretty much a lot of the same instincts, which is we want to take care of our families. We want to be able to be independent. And we want to serve this country when we can. And, that's really where the Midwest is. And I think that's where most Americans are.
About the potential VP pick, of course, this is out of your hands. Biden's team will make that decision at some point on their own. But what do you think the most important characteristic of a vice president in this topsy-turvy election cycle during an unprecedented pandemic is? What do you think that is?
Well, I think what the country needs right now is a real team that can step forward and deal with the multiple crises that the next administration is going to have to deal with, not just on, the inauguration day in January, but on November 4th, the day after the election. Remember that the next administration is going to have to deal with COVID-19, a resurgence of this global pandemic. We don't have enough testing. Americans are dying. Our nursing homes are becoming and have been a place where so many Americans are losing their lives, both as patients and workers. We have an economy that is in free fall, that's not going to recover unless we deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. We have a real issue here in this country with racism that exists in our criminal justice system, and we need to reform police functions in this country. And then we have a global crisis of lack of leadership from the United States in whether it's a World Trade Organization, whether it is a Paris Accord, or whether it's in NATO with defense agreements. So what Joe Biden is going to need is a whole team around him, not just a vice president, but an entire team that is going to be able to address these multiple crises. I think of it as, from a military term, it's the commander is going to need a great XO who can step up and do the job when the commander is not in the area of operation. But he needs that entire staff to be working, at maximum capacity even before they come in and take over, because the country is in crisis on multiple fronts. And I really believe that Joe Biden is going to put together the very best team in every position. Mixing my metaphors between the military and sports, but he's going to put the right team together in every position to deal with these multiple crises, because he knows how to do this, and he's going to find all the right people to do this in every position. And that's why I'm Team Biden all the way.
Well, I don't want to ask you to speculate about a hypothetical here, but I do want to raise that if you were the VP pick, you would be the first Asian American woman on a major party ticket. How significant is that?
Well, this president has been really attacking Asian Americans. He's been using Asian Americans as scapegoats, right? He keeps calling this global pandemic as the Wuhan virus or the Chinese virus or the Kung flu, all of these racist terms that he's using in order to stoke up his base, to distract people from the fact that he did nothing about it. And that back in February, he was actually saying wonderful things about the communist leader of China, about how well they were doing and how this pandemic was just going to disappear. When the reality is, this pandemic, for the most part, most of it came to the US out of Italy. And so it is very significant for me to be on a national stage for other Asian Americans, because we often are the forgotten minority in this country. We're seen as the other, as you saw with the attacks on me by Tucker Carlson. It's easy to talk about Asians as the other, and that we're not truly Americans when we're just as American as anyone else, and love this country as much as anyone else. And so, I do recognize my place on the national stage, and I'm very proud to represent Asian Americans, but I'm also very proud to represent people with disability and working moms and veterans and all of the great diversity that makes this country truly, truly unique and powerful in the world.
From a political standpoint, do you think it would make it more difficult for Trump and Vice President Pence to attack you as a woman of color, woman with a disability, a decorated combat veteran, a working mom? You've sort of made a name for yourself clapping back in the last couple weeks. So how does that work politically?
Ever since I started running for office, I've been attacked. The Republican playbook is to attack your opponent's greatest strengths. It's a Karl Rove play, and frankly, it's never worked. It's never worked. The last person who attacked my patriotism, I beat by 14 points. So really, frankly, we need to talk about what this country needs right now. I mean, I say that, I don't mean to be flippant. We can sort of put forward all the bravado that we want, but at the end of the day, America's hurting, and we need to come together. And we need real leadership in this country to pull us together and to overcome the many crises. The good news is that we can do it. We're a great nation of really amazing people. And when we come together, we can accomplish anything.
So, Senator, I know we're short on time here. I wanted to just get one last question in. In light of the protests, President Trump said that he is sending federal forces to Chicago, to your state. And I was wondering what is your position on federal forces in Illinois?
If federal law enforcement officials are coming to Illinois to work with local officials to provide additional resources, then I welcome them. But the abuse of power that we saw in Portland that could happen anywhere. It should worry every single one of us. And that's what we saw. And it's a continuation of the politicization of federal government that's being carried out by President Trump, whether it was with the National Guard being ordered to suppress peaceful protesters in Lafayette Square, or whether it is what's happening in Portland. That's why, you see veterans standing up to protect and defend people who are peacefully protesting against injustice. It shows that the best of America will not be scared off by bullies. If President Trump really wants to help with issues of gun violence in Chicago, he can call Mitch McConnell right now and ask for a vote on universal background checks. He could call Mitch McConnell right now and ask for a vote to ban magazines greater than 30 rounds. He can call Mitch McConnell right now to increase penalties for straw purchasers. These are people who buy guns for other folks who are not legally able to buy guns. There are many things that we could pass right now if we would be allowed to call them up for a vote. 95% of Americans, for example, truly support universal background checks. If he wants to deal with gun violence, call Mitch McConnell. And if they want to come to Chicago and work with local law enforcement and be supportive of our city, then they're welcome. But I am not going to stand by. I am not going to stand by and let this president politicize our government and to use our government against people who are peacefully exercising their First Amendment rights. Not on my watch.
Senator Duckworth, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.